Welcome to part 4 of this lovely barn owl painting. Now today we'll be adding the white feathers to the face and the body, and we'll finish by laying down the foundation wash layer for those lovely golden brown wings. So stay tuned and let me show you how to paint realistic birds in watercolour, and let's get them brushes wet.
Right, so let's work on the left hand side of the face. Here we go. Going to get some more watercolour white. Start working your watercolour white from the top. Again, if you're able to, flick out. So have your brush upwards and just flick it up. Okay, remember this side's lighter as I said, so we need to have these lines closer together, just so we got a variation in the tone from the left hand side of the face to the right hand side of the face. So just barely touching the paper, grazing the paper. I want to cross a few lines over here and there. So instead of going to the norm, that kind of direction, kind of crossing over this way as well, okay, in places, especially around the top of the eye here, because that makes a difference there as well. Now before carrying on down, I'm just going to finish the rest of this kind of nose area off. Remember, it's lighter from the middle, so I'm going to start from the middle. Remember, you ought to pull out that way if you can. Just that means I've got to get my hand, if I did that I might get my hand in the way of the camera and it won't go right, so I'll do it the wrong way. But that doesn't matter, you know the idea, you know what I'm doing. Okay. As I say, there's not a lot to explain on this apart from just keep at it. Look at the lights, look at the darks, and I can see that this is quite light here. Just want to reinforce these whites, and the way you're going to do that is by increasing the mix. So if I just show you my palette again. So this is a more kind of double cream consistency on there. This is hardened here, so I get a little bit of harder watercolour white, roll my brush in that, and then that'll give me a much brighter white to kind of get this division kind of pinpointed on there, which is what I'm working with at the moment. So this is a brighter white. I know that it's just using less water, okay, but you need to be able to kind of move it on the paper. So if you can't paint with it, you just haven't put enough water with it, but just add a tiny amount of water with watercolour white. Otherwise it doesn't have any effect. Okay. As you can see this division now, it's kind of showing up quite well now on there. So I want to get a few odd ones in that side, I think, looking at it. So that's showing up really well now. Pleased with that. Might get a few odd bits going over, kind of crossing them over so they're not all too in line. Okay, right, so let's carry on around the face and carry on this side. Try not to cover all this lovely kind of brown area in there. We want a few odd strands going into it, but not too many. And then we've got a few kind of highlighted marks around this eyelid. Not many of them, as I say, just a few taps, just to give that impression of the light catching that area. And a few strands of feathers kind of over the top there. Okay, right, let's carry on. Constantly looking at the direction that these go, and the shape of the curve is so important to look at the shape of the curve. If I painted this in one straight line, it could look flat. You know, you have to think about the shape all the time. And this at the moment is going that way. That's why I put these reference marks in initially before I went in with the greys, the kind of bluey grey we used. At least then I've got some idea on how things go. So again, working with the barely touching the paper, just a little bit thick in places there. Just want to get a bit more around here actually. Just notice it's not quite white enough on the top of the curve here. When you look at the reference photo, you'll see it's quite light around the top of the heart shape here above the eye. So it's going to lighten that area a little bit with some thicker white, barely paintable white. It's starting to break on the paper. It's breaking up a little bit on there. And also around the edge of this heart shape as well. I've noticed that that's quite white around there. So tiny marks, popping them in as we go along. Okay, so still working on this. That's too thick, so I'm going to wipe it with my finger, just very carefully. There's just too thick a line there. I pressed a bit too hard with the brush. Don't take a lot to do that. You can go back over with a darker colour if you wanted to, as I said, or you can re-wet the area and just lift it off with a piece of paper towel, like we do when we start lifting paint off in places, you know. Like we did when we did the eyes, we lifted paint off, we were using some kitchen roll on the wet paint. You can do the same. If you put this on too thick, you can re-wet the area and then very quickly just dab it off. And then once it's all dry, you can put some detail underneath again, then do the same again. So redo your detail and start again with the white over the top. So you can repair areas doing that. I've just learned through trial and error over the years, that's all, you know. As I said before, my technique is not the traditional watercolourist kind of technique. It's because they wouldn't normally use white to this degree. You probably prefer highlight on a mask or or in a flower or something like that, but not the way I use it. Okay, so I'm going to look at these little shapes on the end. Remember we did that side? We're going to do the same on this side now as I go around. Kind of build it up, don't fill them in completely. I'm going for some thicker white. Sometimes as well you find with the brush you can flatten the bristles out a little bit, so we'll just bring the palette back in a minute. So if I just try and show, I don't know if you'll see this on the screen here on the camera, but if you wipe the brush on the side of the palette like so, you can end up with a chiseled edge. Okay, I don't know if you can see that on the black. Have a look. You end up with a chiseled edge on the brush, and you can use that chiseled edge to get a nice sharp line. Okay, so that's the little method I occasionally use when I know my brush is getting a little bit worn. I'll just make it into a chiseled edge in the way I wipe it off, the paint off it on the palette. I'll get a nice sharp edge on there. A little bit of a tip there for you, which is worth bearing in mind. It does come in handy. I've used it many times. I'm using it now actually. Just lightly tapping, not filling it all in. I'll leave plenty of gaps in between. Just a suggestion of softness in there as we go along. How's that looking? It's coming together a little bit more now. So the next stage, just zoom out a little bit for you, the next stage will be the top of the head. So we're going to look around this area here and then we'll come down this side, finishing over that side. Now the reason why I do that is because I'm left-handed. If you were right-handed, you might want to come and do the side first and then work your way back to here. So that means that you're not putting your hand in the wet paint all the time, okay? So we'll do that part next, okay? So back to like a creamy consistency is what we're looking for on here. And very carefully, a few suggestions of kind of white feathers within this area. You know, if you can, again, try and pull up like that if you can, because it does make life a little bit better on the finish, the overall finish of the painting as well. So kind of flick up if you can, but normally you'd kind of put the paper on its side or the paint on its side and do it that way. Okay, right, so barely touching the paper as per usual, but a few little flicks here and there, because it doesn't just, this heart shape doesn't just go in one solid heart shape on the end there. It kind of breaks up all the way around, so you've got kind of broken areas, so it's up and down a little bit, not completely, but just a few little broken areas like that. Just kind of break it up a little bit so it's not too straight lined, if you know what I mean. So a few breaks here and there. So that's all I'm doing on this one at the moment. What I'm going to do, just go in a little bit closer, and I think I want to show you, just put a few on the top of the head here. So you're looking around there, here, and so on. I am currently using my new lamp, by the way, which arrived today, since the earlier part of this white, because I've had a break since doing this, and the new lamp has arrived. Yeehaw! So what I want to do is just put a few highlights around. See, we've got this kind of edge here. I don't want to edge it out, I just want to put a few highlights in there. Just barely visible, just a few. Okay. And then while we're at the top of the head, we have got some white marks here and there. Kind of little blotchy marks on the top of the head. So we want to pop a few of those in. Don't go over the top with it. You usually find these marks are either side of the black marks, like that. So either side of the black marks. Can I zoom in a little bit more for you? Getting closer and closer here. So either side of a black mark, you find these little white marks. Odd ones knocking about on their own, little lonesome ones. And these are the ones that are kind of side by side. Friends with the black. I'm losing the plot, I know. Right, and a few more knocking about there. So all I'm trying to do with these is kind of pick out some of the white areas, these little tufty areas which come around. Try and pick them out, some of this white. I don't want to cover everything up in white, okay? So bear that in mind. You want to be a bit gentle on the white. Don't go over the top with it. So this watercolour white is quite thick actually. It's nearly too thick to paint with. Okay, so it's picking up slowly. Just a few around here. It's fairly light on this side of the head, remember. Now this is all nice and dry, because watercolour white does dry very quickly. I'm going to work on the side of the head here first to get some white in there. One thing you want to be careful of when you do this, I'll just zoom in a little bit for you, is don't go all the way to the edge too much. You want a few odd lines in there, but don't put too much in there, otherwise it will cover the dark areas up, and if it covers the dark areas up, you're not going to show the form, the roundness. So most of the white lines are going to be in the middle area, and then just a few odd ones tapering out into the darker area, okay? So I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to start probably, there's a few marks within here, not many, just a few. So it's quite dark in there. And we're going to work our way down as we go, following the shape of the feathers again. So it's that curl like that. Okay, that's what we're looking for. But I'm sticking mostly to the central area, so I'm not going too much into here. A little bit into there as well, but not much. Most of it's around the central area. Right, okay, so again I'm working my way down as we go, looking at the shape. The shape will help create the form that you need. So I'm doing this in the direction that the feathers go again. You know, we may have to put more dark in here yet, we don't know. Until we get this white on, we might find the darks are not dark enough. And if that's the case, especially around this area here, we can put some dark over the top of the white, which wouldn't be a problem. I think the thing is, well, it's knowing how dark to go as well, isn't it? You know, you think, I'd rather go too light than too dark, because it's easier to add another layer of paint than it is to take paint off. And unfortunately, some paint can be staining as well. So if you got like alizarin crimson, for example, I found that to be quite staining at times. In the middle of doing a painting, you try lifting it off. Oh no, it won't come off. Right, so again, building up as we go up down the chest here. So the white doesn't take long to kind of pop on. It really doesn't, especially if you work at this kind of speed. I'm going with a normal kind of arc curve of my hand, as you can see here. I'm just trying to over-exaggerate a little bit to push this up a little bit for you. So yeah, so it's like the arc curve of my hand. So I've got that curve. If it's on this side, it's going the other way, it's easy to turn the paper around. That's what you would normally try and do. Do some reference marks, you know, what direction to go in, and just turn the paper on its side, just so you got that normal curve like this with your hand, and that's what I'm doing with this. So this side is quite handy for me, being left-handed, which is good.
Hi, my name is Paul Hopkinson. So what I do, I show you my technique on how to paint wildlife in watercolour. We go through a variety of subjects from dogs, cats, insects and even botanical subjects as well. And I'll guide you through this right from the beginning all the way through to the end for those final brushstrokes. You'll also find that with most of my videos you also get the outline drawing and that reference photograph as well. Every month we produce a PDF version, so a typed out version with photographs of that monthly main video. You'll get the PDFs for the months that you are a member. Now this is a very in-depth document with lots and lots of pages of information and instruction, as well as obviously the photographs as well. Now another benefit is that you get access as well to my private Facebook group. Now the good thing about my videos is that they'll be here 24/7. So you can watch them 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, it doesn't really matter. They'll always be there. You can stop, you can play, you can rewind, you can pause as many times as you want to do so. So that will give us some ideas on what you'll gain from being a member on my Patreon channel.
It is a repetitive process putting the white on, but it's quite rewarding when you see everything kind of start to come to life a bit more. And you think, oh, it's working, something's happening. And when we get the dark feathers on here, the golden browns, that's when it could really come alive. We've got the light, and then we'll have all the golden browns within the wings. Okay, so that's really, it could really kind of come together. So be prepared for that stage, which will be after the white. Right, okay, so that goes to about there. Right, it's kind of a light area though, isn't there, when you look at the photograph. Pop a few more in here. And then we're going to go down to the second wing and put a white line here. I'll just keep looking back at the reference photo. You can tell when I'm concentrating because I go quiet. So there's another line there, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to just put a light, just one line here for now, and see what I'm going to do with that in a minute. Right, wash out the old brush, my forever wearing out brush, and we're going to soften this down. A little bit of water, just a little bit, not too much though, don't want it too wet. Just soften that white edge down into the grey. That kind of teases it back, okay, which is what I wanted to do with that. So basically it's that simple with that one, so just a white line and just lightly soften the edge of that down with a damp clean brush. Okay, so that's for the second wing. I'll come back here. Now I'm not going to go all the way to the edge of here because I don't want the white to go on this area just yet, because that's going to be the kind of golden browns which we're going to be doing in a bit. So I'm going to go as far as here, okay, so away from the edge. Because what will happen, obviously, if the brown touches this white, it will go quite muddy, which we don't want it to do. Okay. Right, okay, so that is roughly about that area now. This is back to here now. Again, I'm not going to come right to the edge because I want to save that for when we finish off the golden feathers. When they're done, this will then, you know, like we did on the beak here, when you finish off over the top of the feathers, that really finishes off that outline, it breaks it up and kind of really sets it back, and it looks quite smart like that. So they're like the finishing strokes, or just about. So we get these on. We're getting there though, we are getting there. Yeah, you can fine tune as much as you want to, fiddle to a certain degree. Not too much, as I said earlier on. But that is slowly coming together now, isn't it? Starting to. So just zoom back out a little bit for you. Right, so we'll continue that around to the side of the head and we'll see what happens. Then we can look at it, assess it and say, right, okay, we'll call it a day on that part, and then we'll start around on all this lovely detail on the wing. The first thing we need to do is kind of outline where things are. So we've got pencil marks on here. We still need to kind of pick those out, because then pencil marks will sort of disappear if they get wet. So what I tend to do, just very lightly with a kind of a diluted version of burnt umber and lamp black. So I'll just show you that on my palettes here. So we're looking at something like this one here. Diluted version, burnt umber lamp black, that's all I'm going to use. And what I want to do with that is kind of draw around some of these areas, some of these marks, just lightly, barely touching the paper. I'll zoom in a little bit for you there so you can see that hopefully. Okay, a bit more, Paul. Yep, okay, so all I want to do is just kind of outline some of these areas, just so they don't get washed away when we put a layer of colour on here, which we'll be doing shortly. Right, so just kind of all these little marks, which has taken all that time to get drawn on, let's just kind of mark them on there. Especially if we've done this freehand as well, so it takes a lot longer than using kind of transfer paper, so, or trace down paper if you wish. Okay, I think that should do for now. The next stage is to try and get a watercolour on here very carefully, and we'll go from there. Alright, so I'm going to show you the colours which we're going to use for this, for the basic kind of colours for the background of the wings. Remember, we need to put the foundations down first, then we can build on top of that. Okay, right. Well, what I'm going to use on this one, let's see, 3 different colours. So looking at my chart here, I think what we'll use is yellow ochre, right, burnt sienna and burnt umber. Just for now, just for the background colour. So yellow ochre, burnt sienna and burnt umber. Just show you that in my palettes. So we've got yellow ochre here, burnt umber, and we've got burnt sienna down there though. Okay, so just to give you some ideas, the colours I've got on there, and these are mixed up to a kind of watery, it's not water, it's kind of between creamy and water. It's not completely dripping off your brush, okay, because you'll be wetting the paper initially anyway. So again, clean water with your size 5 or 6 brush, whichever you've got at hand. Remember, the brushes I use are not always going to be the same you've got. Once you've got something similar, that's all I'm asking you to do. You can see that all these details are staying put now because I've kind of lightly drawn them in with that kind of washy burnt umber colour, which has helped. So this is just clean water, put a layer of water on here, fairly wet, it's not running but it's fairly wet, and I don't want to go into the white paint, that's why we left it clear here. I should have left it clearer there, to be honest with you, but I didn't. Silly boy. Silly boy. Okay, and then down here, all the way, I'm going to re-wet certain areas because it's going to dry quite quickly. And then the first thing we need to do, just kind of re-wetting. I'm not rubbing this on though, you don't want to rub it hard with the brush, you don't want to go, you don't want to get angry with it. Just lightly touch the paper with the water, that's all you want to do, okay? Don't try and ruffle the paper up, because you will eventually damage your paper by going over and over and over. Right, so we're going to go for the yellow ochre first, okay? So we're going to drop this in. Remember, this is going to dry a little bit lighter in colour. This is going to get dropped in first. And we need to kind of drop this in into the wet area. A little bit dry around there, so we've got to be careful with that. Remember, these are the kind of foundation colours we're going to drop in initially. If you find there's a bit of a hard edge going on there, just lightly soften it down. Try not to touch that white, remember, otherwise it can go muddy. And keep going. Oh, that's strong. Ooh. You can just rework it, go over the top of the brush again, and you can just soften it out. That was strong, that. Ooh, heck. And come all the way across. And down as we go. I'm trying to go in the direction of the feathers as well at the moment, because by doing so, when it dries, if there are any brush strokes there, at least they're going the right way, you know. So think about the direction of the feathers as you do this. Just quickly dropping this colour in, that's all I'm doing. This is the yellow ochre, as I said, with my size. This is a size 5 actually, the one we got today. Size 5 brush. doesn't really matter, as long as it's a reasonable size brush that you can control. And a little bit more around the edge there. Now whilst it's still wet, I'm going to go into the burnt sienna, which is this one here. Okay. I'm going to drop that in certain places, so I want to put some in, so we've got the lines around there. Get a bit more on your brush. Again, trying to look at the direction that the feathers are going underneath. And as I said before, this is just the underlying kind of colours at the moment. Just put a few hints here and there. And again around there. Because all these little white marks will be painted in later on. This is just, as I say, just to kind of get something to work on top of. That's all we're after at the moment. Just look and see where it's darker on the photo. Don't completely cover it though with this colour, okay? You want that yellow ochre to show through. This will completely kill it underneath if you're not careful, so again, just looking at where it goes. Blend it slightly because you don't want completely you don't want pure burnt sienna on there because it can be overpowering. And again, looking at the direction this is going, which is down there. And again, to about here, I think. Because it goes a little bit lighter as it comes around to the edge of the wing. This side isn't too bad actually, I don't think we need much in there. We'll put a little bit there while it's damp, just barely grazing the paper. Oh, I stressed that a bit, it's barely grazing the paper. As we go, oh that's rich. We'll blend it, that'll help. It's going to vary the tone a little bit. And I'm just going to kind of reinforce this part down here because it's quite dark around there because there's a few odd lines knocking about here, so I'm just going to put some in. These will blend out, but I just want a hint of that showing through as it dries. I'm just going to soften this edge down on the top here before we carry on, just with a clean damp brush. Try not to go in that white, remember, just to soften it before it dries so you don't end up with that hard edge. Because we will bring some white over the top of this one, so all this is painted, we'll put some white highlights for feathers, just hinting over the top in places. Right, so now we're going to go into the burnt umber, okay, which is that one, get it right Paul. So a little bit of burnt umber, and we're going to drop that in as well. Just in places, just a little bit here and there. You don't need much of this because this will completely flatten and deaden the painting, so just a few hints here and there, not on the back area. So that's drying already, I might have to put a little bit more yellow ochre in there, so it's getting a lot lighter. Just a few hints here and there. This side especially because it's a lot darker here. And this will mix with the two colours underneath as we go. Leave patches in between, don't cover it all up. A bit more in there. Okay, just rinse my brush out a minute, and a little bit more down here as well I think, because it's quite dark in places down there. Amazing when you start putting these colours on, the difference it can make. I'm going to go back into the yellow ochre just a little bit and just put a little bit more in here, because it's getting a bit too light in there. I don't know what yours is looking like, but I mean you want to just, I don't want the white of the paper showing there, I don't want it too pale, I want a little bit of colour in here. So I'm just going to drop a little bit in there before it dries, just to kind of rich it up a little bit. What else we got? So back into the burnt umber, into these lines here. Again, these will dry and as it goes. Just to darken it, we'll be putting a lot of detail over the top. And we're roughly about there now, to kind of let it dry. I'm not going to go into that song again, let it dry, and let it dry, and then we'll come back to this once it's nice and bone dry. You can use a hairdryer if you want to dry, but do it from a distance, okay?
Okay, well there you go. Join me in the last part when we will finally add those amazing golden wings with their intricate little patterns. I'll see you there.